умеете прощать?
Да. Но не все.
А что невозможно простить?
Предательство.
And we are back. This is episode number 64 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. We have so much to talk about. We have a deteriorating situation in Niger. We have minimal updates on the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the SMO area. And we have Prigozhin's plane going down and Prigozhin's death. So I'm just going to dive right in. I was going to do this video 2 days ago, but, you know, all of those things coming out at the same time really kind of forces me to slow down, wait for stuff to come out, information to appear, and then I'll tackle it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to tackle it. And I wanted to start with Prigozhin. So about 3 days ago, Prigozhin and some of his staff on Wagner were flying from St. Petersburg to, I believe it was Moscow, and an explosion happened. According to the Russian aviation investigation group, I don't know what they have in Russia, what it's called, but they have basically come out and said, the investigators have come out and said that there was some sort of bomb placed underneath the landing gear of this private jet that was flying Prigozhin from St. Petersburg to Moscow, and it exploded in the air. The landing gear, or some part of it, eventually took out the wing, and the plane went into a spin and just fell from the sky. We have plenty of images of the plane. We have not heard anything from Prigozhin, and it seems pretty clear to everybody that he's dead. So this is a very big deal. Prigozhin was, I mean, you know, some people consider him the mastermind behind the Bakhmut meat grinder. Some people say that's General Surovikin, but, you know, it's neither here nor there. He led the Wagner organization through the Battle of Bakhmut. He then led a march on Moscow, which, you know, some people called a coup, some people called, you know, a civil war. There was a bunch of different names for it being tossed around. But at the end of the day, he did something treacherous against the Russian state. And the Russians, in return, Putin in return, made a deal that they would go to Belarus. All of Wagner would go to Belarus, and that Prigozhin was not to return to operations in the Russian Federation. And that was kind of part of the deal. Now, at first, I was under the, I guess, assumption that Prigozhin was a kind of a pawn in a bigger game. They were moving Wagner from Russia to Belarus so it could be so it could regain its plausible deniability for operations in Africa and all over the place. Now, this death comes at a very, very odd time. Prigozhin had said that Wagner was making its comeback on August 5th. That didn't happen exactly timing-wise. They are still, you know, they're still operating inside of Africa. So that's kind of, I'm pretty sure that's where they were planning on going, was to Africa. Now, where are they going? Time will tell. We don't really know. Their operations in Africa are still ongoing. And there hasn't been a new announcement about a new head of Wagner. There hasn't been the dissolution of Wagner yet. So the Wagner question is still wide open. General Surovikin, the General Armageddon, basically the person responsible for the defense lines in Zaporozhye, the Bakhmut meat grinder, and he was the head of the aerospace forces. The Russian aerospace forces was dismissed from his post. There's a lot of rumors about that too. Some people say he's under house arrest for, you know, attempting to assist Prigozhin in his armed assault against Moscow, his march to Moscow. Some people say he was removed from his post to be put into a different position, which has not been announced yet. Could that be the leader of Wagner? Possibly. Could he just be removed and put into a civilian position? Possibly. Who knows what's going to happen there? It's kind of a toss-up. You know, we're just waiting. I don't have a direct you know, line to the Kremlin or to anywhere for that matter. So for me to get information, at that depth is extremely hard, and all of this is just speculation. I do believe we will see him again. He was a very popular general. I don't think he had really any problems with Grosimo or Shoigu, which was kind of the issue with Prigozhin and some of the other generals who have been removed, which is a normal thing in war. I mean, you're going to have people that are always unhappy with people, particularly with Shoigu and Grosimo and the way that Putin has gone about this. The military tends to disagree, but, the military isn't always, the military doesn't always have the final say in these things. Sometimes there are political aspects to war that need to be taken into account. I think a lot of people tend to forget that. They want the war to be won as quickly as possible, as bloodlessly for the Russians or the Ukrainians as possible. This goes for both sides. But there are political aspects that can override military priorities. Because if you don't pay attention to those political aspects, you could suffer military defeat later on through your actions. And like I said, that's just something that people really don't seem to understand. When you look at Russia's position, Russia is winning in places like Africa, the Middle East. They're closer with China now, which is a big deal for their economy. There's a lot that's going on, and to say, oh, well, Russia needs to go harder in Ukraine, well, that could have negative consequences in other places in the world. Africa might not look so kindly if the Russians went in and started just destroying everything. It's not really a good look, and it can have unforeseen consequences. So I believe that the Russians are taking things slow and careful for that reason, and not really giving in to the hardliners. Not to say that Shoigu and Grosimo don't make mistakes. They absolutely do. They're humans. Everybody makes mistakes. Is there corruption? Almost unquestionably, there's corruption in every leadership position in the world. But they're there for a reason. Putin has trust in them, and they're going to get the job done the way that they deem most applicable to the situation. And so what happens with General Surovikin? I don't really think he was removed for negative reasons, because his performance in the SMO is very strong. This is a common rumor, I guess you would call it, statement by a lot of people that are very close to the Russian military, is that he did a very good job. He was very well respected. And sometimes, that can get you in trouble if you're outshining people. But my thinking is he's going to be moved somewhere, TBD. And really, what makes sense to me is that he would be placed in charge of the northern grouping. There is a rumored Russian offensive coming from the north. We've seen smaller offensive actions in the Kharkov area around Kupiansk. I think that these are all primers. They're all poking and prodding and figuring out where the Ukrainians are weak and taking over certain advantageous positions and trying to really break down the Ukrainian defense in this region so that they can then go on a much larger offensive. The Ukrainians are talking about it. The Ukrainians are reacting to it. The West is now starting to talk about it. Even the Russians have come out and said within the next 30 days or so, and they can't specify when, obviously, but there will be some large Russian action in Ukraine. Whether that's going to happen, once again, TBD. This is always a time will tell situation, but the Russians are amassing troops in the north, and with the Ukrainian offensive coming to an end, or culminating, I guess you would say, without any major results or gains, and a lack of Russian attrition from this offensive. No armies were once again surrounded and destroyed. The line has barely moved. Why wouldn't the Russians go on the offensive? The Ukrainians are now drained. They used a massive amount of their resources, ammunition, aircraft, air defense, everything has been positioned in the south for this. So why not go in the north and force the Ukrainians to move brigades around? There is rumors that the one of the Jaeger brigades that was built for the Ukrainian counteroffensive has been moved up to the Kupiansk area. And once you start uncommitting reserves from your offensive for defensive actions, you can basically summarize the offensive as a failure. The Ukrainians have likely captured Robitny by this time, but it's still yet to be seen. There's claims that the Russians, it's still 50-50, or the whole village is in the gray zone. There's not much of the village left. It's pretty much completely leveled. It's been the front line for almost 12 weeks now. We're coming up on 85 days into this counteroffensive with basically no results still. And it's just starting to look less and less likely that anything's going to come out of this. And, you know, if you have a Russian offensive right around the corner, you know, you have to move units around to stop that. So there's a lot of that going on. But back to Prigozhin's death really fast. I know a lot of you are going to be questioning who did it. And, you know, the clip I played at the very beginning of this podcast, you know, Putin talking about the one thing that can't be forgiven is treachery, you know, going behind the back of the people that you are supposed to be working for. Just don't be a traitor. And he was a traitor. I expected once I started to understand that it wasn't as much of a psyop and there was actually something negative going on, which came after the, you know, Wagner moved to Belarus and all that. And he shot down multiple Russian aircraft and killed pilots and air crew. So it was a pretty telling situation, and that can't really go unpunished. I would not be surprised if this was Putin or, you know, the Russian Federation dealing with Prigozhin and Wagner's upper command. You can't have that. I think that this action makes Putin look strong again. It kind of deters any of this from happening ever again. It could have been, you know, somebody who the Ukrainians paid off in where the plane had been, because the plane had been getting maintenance done on it, so it wasn't necessarily totally secure. Something could have been placed up there, up in the landing gear, and, you know, blown up when it was flying. But to me, I'm going to have to go ahead and put my money on it being somebody high up in the Russian Federation, and that's where I'm going to let it sit. That's my personal opinion. You're more than welcome to disagree. I don't have all the facts. I could definitely be wrong. Once again, this is all speculation, but it just kind of makes sense. The timing is pretty decent. I had talked in depth with Dr. Sneckel, Dr. Sneckeltron. He's a Twitter user. He's got a pretty large account. Go follow him. He does pretty good analysis of stuff. And he was talking to me about how this was months ago when the actual march on Moscow happened. He said, this will not go unpunished. They're going to let it sit, let it cool off, let it be kind of forgotten about. And then a while later, you know, he's going to fall out of a window, is, you know, how he put it. And I guess, you know, falling from the sky in a plane is similar. I didn't expect the Russians to make such a big scene out of it. Maybe that was the point, was to make it very public. Maybe it wasn't the Russians at all. Who knows? But as far as we can tell, Prigozhin is dead. Yutkin, his second in command, is also dead, who was like the original Wagner. And now the Wagner organization is without a leader. There have been rumors that Wagner is going to stay in Belarus. I just think that they're going to place new leadership in charge of Wagner, and then Wagner will become an extension of the Russian MOD with some sort of weird, plausible deniability that nobody really believes in. They won't believe that Wagner's operating on their own. They're going to be probably under the assumption that Wagner is directly responding to whatever the Russian government tells it to do. Now, will you know, Serbia can be there? I don't know. We're just waiting to figure out who's going to be the next head of Wagner, if Wagner is even around, if they change names. Who knows? This happens all the time with PMCs. They just go through transformations and they become a different organization doing the same thing. So there yeah, it's just a wait and see situation. That's all we can do. So I'll leave that there. I wanted to talk a little bit about the counteroffensive now. I have talked about it slightly, but it is now 85 days into the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and they have possibly made it into Robotny. But other than that, there has been almost no progress anywhere, no progress around Bakhmut, no progress on the Vimitsky Ledge, no progress on the left bank of Kherson, where they were trying to do something for some reason, no move on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, nothing. This feels very stalled. The Ukrainians have amassed a large amount of armor. I think they're waiting for Robotny to be completely secured and try to make a push on the town just south of it, Nova something or another, just another little nothing village, basically. But the Ukrainians are using the 82nd Mechanized Brigade for this. If anybody doesn't know, the 82nd Mechanized Brigade is a part of the 10th Corps, and the 10th Corps is I don't know why I said corpse. I always read it like that, corpse, because that's how it reads, but it's Corps. Has taken pretty heavy attrition already. We've seen multiple strikers getting destroyed, multiple marauders getting destroyed. We still haven't seen any Challenger 2 tanks, so they're not operating in sync with the 82nd Mechanized Brigade's other armored vehicles, such as strikers, but this was one of the elite brigades that was supposed to do a lot of work. We've also seen very heavy attrition on the 14th Artillery. I don't, is it regiment or brigade? Who is supporting the 82nd. The 82nd also has, I think, 20 self-propelled M109 howitzers that were delivered from the West. So these are getting taken out. The artillery support is thinning, and the offensive is going nowhere. It was just recently Ukrainian Independence Day, so they went about their normal business of trying to cause as much chaos and distraction to give a morale boost to the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military. And in this, they sent 42 drones to Crimea in probably one of the single largest attacks we've seen from the Ukrainians. And those were all intercepted. 33 were said to have been downed by electronic warfare, and 9 were downed by Russian air defense. We have pictures of these, so this is a real event that happened. The Russian MOD isn't making this up. The Ukrainians came out and said that they had launched this massive drone attack and dozens of Russians had died. I don't know how that's even possible. These drones are not really sophisticated in any way. They don't have, Guarantees when they come in, they're like real high and then they reach their target and they fall and they hit really hard. The drones that the Ukrainians are using are these Chinese publicly available drones. They're okay, but they don't carry the right enough explosives, and they don't fly fast enough or attack at a specific angle. They just kind of fly into stuff and explode. So I don't think that there were any casualties. I didn't see anything, but that was part of their Independence Day. Another part was they actually sent some small speedboats to the edge of Crimea. These were special forces operators, I imagine. They got out of the boats, they planted a flag and took some pictures or whatever they do, and then they were forced to retreat. So a waste. I don't know. Ukraine has probably lost 200 plus men doing these random little propaganda stunts on Snake Island, across the Dnieper River in places, all over into Russia. And it seems so pointless to me. I don't really get it. I guess it gives a fake morale boost, but I don't know, just betting on hopium is not the way I would go about business. In this counteroffensive, we've seen the Russians perform spectacularly. I mean, it's been unbelievable how little progress the Ukrainians have been making with their force disposition in this area. They have a lot more forces than the Russians, and they should be making progress, and they're just not. The Russian defenses are very sturdy. Russian equipment is doing its job on the Ukrainian advance, and particularly FPV drones. I want to put a bunch of them here. I'll at least put some. But these FPV drones, especially from this unit, BOBR, which they're the Beavers, that's their little mascot, have been absolutely savage. I don't know how else to explain it. It's been horrible to watch these drones. Basically, if you guys don't know what these FPV drones are, they're little quadricopters with an RPG attached to it. It's very simple, very cheap. They mass produce them. They have hundreds of them waiting. You know, there's never a shortage of RPG rounds in Russia. So they have thousands of these drones, and they started using them on equipment because equipment is much more valuable than manpower. But now that they have so many, and the Ukrainians are relying more and more on infantry instead of armored vehicles in these assaults, the drone operators have now started targeting individual Ukrainians, and it is getting bloody. I mean, in one day, I think I saw 20 casualties on the Ukrainian side from these Russian FPV drones. It's just horrific to watch. These drones come in, they fly in, they're super maneuverable, and they will chase people down and just blow up right next to them. And the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground can't really do much. It's really hard with an AK to shoot down FPV drones. If I were those Ukrainians, I would be carrying a little double barrel or a over-under with birdshot in it, because I would be so terrified of these drones flying into me. It's something that both sides are going to have to learn to deal with, and every military in the world is going to have to learn to deal with these. I would expect within the next couple of years, every infantry squad to be equipped with some sort of electronic warfare device in their backpack, where they can block drone signals so they can't get hit by these things. It's going to be a menace. And as soon as somebody starts mass producing really, really sophisticated versions of these with automatic tracking, which the Russians have already been designing. We saw that at the 2023 Military Expo. And I'll try to put that video up here if I can find it. But you know, as soon as they start getting super sophisticated and they start getting like AI help, these things are going to be an absolute nightmare. They're going to be able to just be launched, and they'll go look for something, find something, and hit something. It's going to be, it will be something that needs to be responded to, definitely. And I think we're going to see a large push from a lot of the military industrial complexes around the world to get something available to counter this. But you know, other than that, the Ukrainians struck Crimea supposedly with a Storm Shadow cruise missile, which is a pretty large red line. We'll see if anything comes out of that. They hit a Russian air defense system. The Ukrainians claim it was S-400. The Russians are claiming it was an S-300 system. I don't know. I can't really tell from the video, but they're pretending like this is some huge win. They got one of the launchers of the battery, you know, but the Russians have destroyed multiple S-300 systems in the last 2 weeks. Whole batteries have been destroyed. So this is not really a win. This is just kind of part of war. It's just another attrition step. But you know, a win is a win when you're struggling to get anything done. As with the grain deal, I wanted to bring up the grain deal a little bit. We've seen continued strikes on the Romanian Odessa-Ukrainian border by Garand-2 drones and missiles. They are crippling Ukraine's agriculture infrastructure for shipping. They have been, you know, the Ukrainians have kind of been trying to get around this by going through Romania and shipping out of Romania and doing all of this other stuff. But the amount of food coming out of the country is just not great. And it's going to start impacting the European economies very strongly. We'll see there. Time will tell again, but I expect food inflation to be quite high in Europe this winter. So that's something to pay attention to. In other news, we had a Ukrainian aviation incident that occurred in the Zhytomyr region. This involved some well-known pilots on social media. It was a big hit for Ukraine. A lot of people were very sad about this. 3 pilots died. They were training in, I think it's I-39 or L-39 training aircraft, very small planes. And they were MiG pilots. So they were originally MiG-29 pilots. I think two of them were experienced pilots who had been in combat and stuff. But the third one was a training pilot, a pilot in training rather. And these two planes collided in the air and all three pilots died. This is pretty significant. Ukraine is already suffering a pilot shortage. Originally, I thought it was two MiG-29s because, during this day when this happened, when this collision happened, the Russians had sent up MiG-31 interceptors 6 times. And if anybody knows, the MiG-31 interceptor is the carrier of the Kinzhal hypersonic cruise missile. And they set off the alarm in Ukraine, the air raid alarm, every single time one of these things goes up. And most recently, Kinzhals have been used on air bases, some in Zhytomyr as well. So I was under the impression, and I suspected that the Ukrainians were lifting their planes into the air so they weren't getting struck or potentially struck, and they were moving them around, and they just had two MiG-29s collide. Unfortunately, that wasn't what happened. They were, for some reason, training during these air raid sirens, which I don't understand. I mean, if that's going on, your pilot situation must be pretty dire. And they collided and died. And now Ukraine is out 3 pilots. So it's a very big loss. The aircraft loss isn't that big of a deal. They were just in trainers, but it's the pilots are much more valuable than the planes, especially when they were, they're talking about getting F-16s and they need the pilots. They just lost them. I don't know if these guys were actually training to be on the F-16, but they would have been likely some of the people that are at least supporting this F-16 program in other planes like MiGs, and now they're gone. So that's quite a significant loss. I wanted to touch on Niger a little bit. There have been significant updates in the Niger situation. The Economic Cooperation of West African states, has come out and said that they are now fully ready for military intervention in Niger, which, I don't really know if they're actually ready. It seems like they're trying to put something together, but we have some major updates coming out and a further deterioration of the situation. Niger has asked the French ambassador to leave, as well as getting ready to ask the German and United States ambassadors to leave the country as well. That would probably mean the closure of the embassies in the country, and it would be a significant decoupling from any Western connection that they have. This is bad news for the French. The Niger junta in control has actually threatened to remove the French ambassador and staff by military force, if required, if they do not exit the country in the next 48 hours. And this 48-hour ultimatum had come out like 24 hours ago. So this is the final day for them to leave the country. We'll see if that happens. We'll see if the Nigerian military / government actually removes them by force. But this is not looking good for Niger. It's not looking bad for Niger yet, but it's not looking good in terms of preventing a war. It's now looking more and more like a war will happen. Hopefully it doesn't. I think we can all agree that would not be a great thing, but it could be happening. The German and United States ambassadors, I don't think have actually received the notice that they need to leave the country in 48 hours. I think that those were released on accident. But the junta has come out and said that they do intend to deliver these messages to both of the embassies. So expect that to happen in the coming days. Those ambassadors will be forced to leave the country if they actually go through with it. But I think that's it. That's what I wanted to talk about. I'm now going to go into some questions that I put up on my Telegram. If you guys want to ask questions, sometimes I put little posts up where I ask for questions in the comments section, and I will go through and answer some of them. So a little audience interaction, and that, is what we're doing now. So I'm going to look at these and I'm going to answer some of them. All right. Do you think there will be an attack along the territory of the destroyed dam? What this individual is referring to is the Novakhovka Dam, which was destroyed by either the Russians or the Ukrainians. We don't know. Either way, the dam is gone. So there is this dam that was opened up. It made the Dnieper River south of this dam much wider for a very long period of time. It mostly affected the Russian side, washed away minefields and entrenched positions. The Russians had to pull back, and then they were able to return after the water level subsided. And now the Novakhovka Dam, or reservoir, sorry, is dry and starting to grow plants. So the ground is firm. The Ukrainians would be able to cross it. I do think the plan was to cross this reservoir after success in the counteroffensive, which never ended up coming. I think the likelihood of a river crossing or a push over the dam is now becoming less and less likely. I'm never going to rule anything out. It's still very much a possibility. Who knows what they have in store, but the way it's looking is like, if they go for something like that, it will have no support from another pincer from the other direction. The Russians will be able to focus it down, destroy it, bog it down, and remove it. It's incredibly risky, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and have to say no on that one. Is it likely we will see a Russian counteroffensive this year? And is it possible that Poland and Lithuania are staging troops on the Belarusian border for a potential invasion? I don't think that the Polish have any ambitions of actually invading Belarus or Ukraine. Once again, this is just unnecessary risk that these countries are taking on. I think that they're there as a safety net in case something does happen. They have the option to go in, but I don't necessarily think that there are any major plans for that. In terms of a Russian offensive, I think it's very likely we will see a Russian offensive in the north in the coming months. I don't know for sure. The Russians have been very slow and methodical with how they do things, but it's beginning to look like now's the time for the Russians to do something before the muddy season begins. Will it happen? Again, time will tell. We're in this very weird position where we're just waiting for something to happen off the back of this Ukrainian counteroffensive failing. Have you seen the TOS-1 in action lately? TOS-1A. That is the thermobaric multiple launch rocket system that has a range of about 10 kilometers. I haven't seen very many of these. It could be because multiple have been lost. It could be because production issues with ammunition. I don't know. I have seen some have been operating, but also these are moved around very secretively. So you don't really know where they're going to be until after they're there, and then you get some footage. They're probably working somewhere all the time, and we just don't end up seeing it. That's something that I think a lot of people don't understand, is there are losses that you will never see. There are casualties that you will never see, and that is happening all over the front all the time. You're only probably seeing 20-30% of the losses if it's under drone coverage. You know, artillery is firing all day and night, and you're not always going to have footage of that. You know, it's not something that's always constantly going to be in front of your face. You won't see 100% of losses. So always add that into your analysis or your thinking when you're contemplating this stuff. You don't always know what's going on. There's a lot of stuff that isn't being filmed, especially on the Russian side. They do not post a lot. So be on the lookout for that. I was wondering about the fresh supply of equipment on the Russian side. Are they able to replace neutralized equipment quickly enough? Yeah, so the Russian wartime economy is basically in full swing. Russian industry is pumping out vehicles and ammo and everything that the Russian military needs at pretty high rates now. It's only going to speed up and increase. We've seen that with Lancet, with the FPVs. These things have become a nuisance on the battlefield for Ukraine because they're just simply everywhere. They are always in the sky. And it's really probably what has hurt the Ukrainian counteroffensive the most, is the military industrial complex of Russia really coming up into full speed. The sanctions war didn't work out the way they wanted it to, so the Russian military industrial complex was able to respond the way it should have, and it's working in full throttle. So I would not expect any shortage of anything really on the battlefield anytime soon. All of the chip manufacturing and stuff has been replaced via China, so they're not really missing out on a lot. Is there a possibility of an uprising among discontent AFU members against the Zelensky government? Coming off of a failed counteroffensive is a very risky time for the Ukrainian government. Morale is already starting to get shaky. I mean, Western articles are coming out talking about failures in the counteroffensive, what's next, what are the Russians going to do, when the talk was supposed to be Crimean liberation. I had made in not my last video, but the video before that, I had kind of gone into a discussion about how I think NATO saw this counteroffensive going. June 4th, it started. June 10th and 11th, they showed their progress in Vilnius, Lithuania at the NATO summit. And then by September, they were going to offer up some sort of negotiated settlement to the Russians on the back of this Ukrainian victory. That didn't happen. And now you have this shakiness in the West. And I think the more and more shaky and timid the West becomes on this Ukraine project, the worse and worse morale will get in the AFU. And if the Russians go on the offensive here and actually claim a large chunk of territory that a lot of Ukrainians had died for, that's going to bode very poorly for the Ukrainian government. They're also talking about a complete total mobilization in Ukraine, which would be the last remaining men in the country basically are going to be scooped up and forced into combat roles. That's going to hurt morale too. That's going to hurt domestic morale heavily. There are a lot of people that really probably shouldn't be in the military just because of their circumstance and their willingness to fight. And once you start drafting those people, families get very upset. These are not probably poor families. These are going to be more wealthy families now. You're getting to the bottom of the barrel of your mobilization pool. So that's going to definitely negatively affect the popularity of the Zelensky government. I would not be surprised if regime change came at some point, whether that is Western-backed regime change or internal power struggles that cause regime change. That's something that I think the Russians are also looking forward to in the future. If the West wants to negotiate with Russia on Ukraine before the 2024 elections, they will be forced to change the regime in Ukraine because the current leadership is just completely unwilling, and they're kind of they are not in line with what the West wants all the time. They have their own pragmatic interests, I guess I wouldn't even call it pragmatic. They have their own interests, and they're going to go after those interests to the fullest of their abilities. Whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, that's up to the leaders of Ukraine. But we have seen some dissension between the West and Ukraine. I don't think they're exactly a perfect little puppet that the West wanted them to be, and they make a lot of stupid decisions, in my opinion. Let me see, get another question here. Do you believe that Poland will invade the Western? I already kind of answered that. What do you think the borders will look like after the war? Oh man, this is the $1 million question, right? Very possibly we see Russia get the 4 oblasts and then some sort of negotiated settlement if there is some regime change in Kiev, or if the writing's on the wall. But if that happens, I would expect monumental guarantees from the West in terms of no NATO membership, probably no EU membership, some sort of demilitarization of Ukraine, a lot, if it's only these 4 regions. If that doesn't happen, I think everything east of the Dnieper and Odessa and Nikolaev are the bare minimum. You cannot leave Ukraine with sea access, and you cannot leave any Russian-held areas or ethnically Russian areas to Ukraine and not because of necessarily the people that are living there and, the protection of the ethnic Russians, but more the removal of the profitable territories from the Ukrainian state so that there's nothing left in Ukraine to invest in. I think that's going to be the most important aspect. And if that doesn't occur, if the Ukrainians still don't stop, the West still doesn't stop, then I think all of Ukraine will be the end result of this. I think that that's what the Russians would most probably like, neglecting West Ukraine, but everything from Odessa up to Kiev and east, I think would be the probably a maximum goal of the Russian SMO. And one more question. In Iraq, friendly fire was responsible for something like 24% of U.S. deaths. What percentage of Russian deaths here do you think are due to friendly fire? At the beginning of the war, much higher. I don't know what the exact percentage would be. I would not doubt that it would be something along those lines, but that was because the lines were so fluid and, the military wasn't in the same step with each other all the time. So friendly fire accidents were very common. On the Ukrainian side, they were extremely common. You started to see the Ukrainians using yellow tape and bright blue tape to identify each other, whereas the Russians use like little white bands and red bands, which are harder to see. I think that the friendly fire issue on the Russian side was a lot less significant than on the Ukrainian side. It was definitely still there. There's always going to be friendly fire issues in a live fire situation with lines that are moving. But now that things have stabilized, I don't think that the Russians have much of a problem with that anymore at all. I don't hear or see about it very often. So I don't actually think either side has as much issue in that department since everything has kind of slowed down and stabilized. I think that's where I'm going to end it. If you guys like any of this, if you've made it this far, please go support me on Patreon. That will be live with this video. I would like to start doing this full time. I'm almost there, actually, and I'm very, very happy about that. This is my passion. This is what I love to do. I like to bring this information. I think it's important that I'm here doing this. So if you guys want to support me, obviously like, subscribe, share the video, follow me on Telegram and Twitter. Those areas are also, those following there helps me because, you'll see when I post my videos, you'll see information on the conflict. I provide a lot. If you subscribe to the Patreon, there will be 2 unique podcasts posted to the Patreon every week, every month at least. And I will make sure that those are good podcasts, whether they are audience-based or very special guests that I have on. Time will tell on that. But yeah, so if you support me and you have the ability to financially support me, if you do that on Patreon, that would be great. I will also have special incentives on Patreon where you guys can ask questions that will definitely 100%, if they're appropriate, be featured on the podcast episodes and so on. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it and have a good day. Bye.